The morning sun rose over New Sejong like it had for the past 20 years. Golden light spread across the fields of grain that stretched to the horizon. The colony had grown from a few prefab shelters into a thriving community of 47,000 people. They had built schools, hospitals, and parks. They had turned a dead rock into a living world. Captain Hyunwoo Park stood in the observation deck of the orbital defense station, watching the planet below. He sipped his coffee and smiled. His shift was almost over. In 2 hours, he would take the shuttle down to visit his sister and her family. His nephew had just turned 5. Hyunwoo had promised to bring him a toy spaceship. The alarm shattered the peaceful morning. 3 massive shapes dropped out of slipspace, appearing on the sensors like ghosts materializing from nothing. Hyunwoo's coffee cup fell from his hand, floating in the zero gravity as he rushed to his station. The ships were huge, each one 5 times the size of the defense station. He had never seen vessels that large before. Unknown ships? This is New Sejong Defense Station Alpha. Identify yourselves and state your intentions. Hyunwoo's voice was steady, but his heart pounded in his chest. No response came. The 3 ships began moving toward the planet, ignoring all hails. Their weapon ports opened like hungry mouths. Hyunwoo hit the emergency broadcast. All stations. This is Alpha. We have hostile contacts. 3 capital ships. Unknown origin. Sound the alarm. Get people to shelters now. Down on the planet's surface, the warning sirens began to wail. Dr. Mireille Choi was in her laboratory when the alarm started. She had been examining a new strain of wheat that could grow faster in New Sejong's soil. The work of 20 years sat in neat rows of test tubes and plant samples. She looked up, confused. They had drills sometimes, but never this early in the morning. Her assistant ran into the lab, face pale. Dr. Choi, the orbital station says we're under attack. Real ships. We need to get to the shelters. Mireille's blood went cold. Attack? Who would attack them? New Sejong had nothing worth stealing. They were just farmers and scientists trying to build a new life. She grabbed her datapad, thinking she should save her research files. Then she heard the sound. A deep rumbling that made the building shake. Through the window, she saw the sky light up with streaks of fire falling from space. Run, she screamed. In the farming district, young Dae-hyun was helping his father feed the chickens when the sirens started. The 12-year-old boy looked up at the sky. Shading his eyes from the sun, he saw 3 dark shapes hanging in the blue sky like vultures. Dad, what are those? His father grabbed his hand, pulling him toward the house. Inside, now, get your mother and sister. We need to get to the shelter. But there was no time. The first plasma lance struck the northern settlement. The beam of superheated energy hit the ground like the finger of an angry god. Everything within half a kilometer simply ceased to exist. Buildings, people, trees, all turned to vapor in an instant. The shockwave flattened everything for 3 kilometers beyond that. Dae-hyun saw the flash of light. It was brighter than looking at the sun. Then, the blast wave hit. The last thing he felt was his father's hand squeezing his own. On the orbital station, Hyunwoo watched in horror as his home died. The 3 alien ships methodically fired on every settlement, every town, every cluster of buildings. They worked in a pattern, ensuring complete coverage. Nothing was spared. Fire everything we have, Hyunwoo ordered. The station's defensive railguns opened up, hurling tungsten slugs at the attacking ships. A few struck home, but the alien shields absorbed the impacts easily. The station's missiles streaked toward the enemy, but point defense lasers swatted them from space like annoying insects. One of the alien ships turned its attention to the station. Hyunwoo knew what was coming. He activated the emergency beacon, broadcasting on all frequencies. Someone had to know what happened here. Someone had to tell Earth. This is Captain Hyunwoo Park of New Sejong Colony. We are under attack by 3 unknown capital ships. They are killing everyone. Please, someone help us. Tell Earth what happened here. Tell them The plasma beam cut through the station like a hot knife through butter. Hyunwoo and his crew of 38 people died instantly. The bombardment continued for 6 hours. The alien ships, warships of the Valen Collective, made sure their work was thorough. Every structure was reduced to rubble and molten metal. The beautiful fields that had taken decades to cultivate became fields of glass. The forests where children had played were vaporized. The lakes where families had picnicked boiled away into steam. Dr. Murray Choi had almost reached the shelter when the second wave of strikes hit her section. The research center where she had spent 20 years of her life became a crater. She never felt the end. When the Valen ships finished, New Sejong was a graveyard. 47,000 people, gone. Men, women, children, all erased from existence. The colony that had been humanity's pride, a symbol of what they could achieve among the stars, was now a monument to sudden, brutal death. The 3 Valen dreadnoughts turned and prepared to leave. Their commander broadcast a message across all frequencies, making sure it would reach human space eventually. This is High Commander Velak of the Valen Collective. The human settlement in this sector violated our territorial claim. This is your warning. Retreat from all disputed regions, or face the same fate. The Valen Collective has spoken. The ships slipped back into faster-than-light travel, disappearing as quickly as they had arrived. They left behind a burning world and thousands of floating pieces of debris that had once been homes, schools, and dreams. In the silence of space, the emergency beacon from the destroyed orbital station continued broadcasting. It would take 3 days for that signal to reach the nearest human outpost. 3 days before anyone would know that New Sejong had died. 3 days before Earth learned that 47,000 of its children had been murdered without warning or mercy. The beacon transmitted its loop of data over and over, a digital scream in the darkness. Captain Hyunwoo's last words echoed into the void. Tell Earth what happened here. And Earth would hear. And Earth would answer. The emergency beacon's signal reached Outpost Meridian 3 days after New Sejong died. Lieutenant Hanako was on monitoring duty when the distress call came through. She listened to Captain Hyunwoo's final transmission once. Then, she played it again, her hands shaking. Then she hit the priority alert that would wake up every officer on the station. Within an hour, the news was racing toward Earth at the speed of light, carried by the military's quantum communication network. Within 6 hours, every human settlement across 50 star systems knew what had happened. 47,000 people, murdered without warning. An entire colony, wiped from existence. Premier Ji-won Lee was in a budget meeting when her security chief burst into the room. The man's face was gray, his eyes red. He handed her a data pad without saying a word. Ji-won read the report twice. She felt her stomach turn to ice. Cancel all my appointments, she said quietly. Contact every member of the Solar Parliament. Emergency session in 2 hours. And get me Admiral Kim. The news spread across Earth like wildfire. People gathered in the streets, staring at public screens showing the last images from New Sejong. Pictures of smiling families, children playing in parks, farmers working in fields. All gone now. All turned to ash and glass. In Seoul, protests erupted within hours. Millions of people marched through the streets, demanding action. In New York, crowds gathered at the United Nations Memorial Plaza, lighting candles for the dead. On Mars Colony, workers stopped their shifts and stood in silence, facing toward where New Sejong had been. The Solar Parliament convened in the Great Chamber in Geneva. Representatives from Earth, Luna, Mars, the Belt Stations, and all the outer colonies gathered. The chamber, which usually buzzed with conversation and debate, was silent as a tomb. Premier Ji-won Lee stood at the central podium. She was 53 years old and had led Earth's unified government for 8 years. She had dealt with economic crises, natural disasters, and diplomatic disputes. But nothing had prepared her for this. Members of Parliament, she began, her voice steady but tight with controlled rage. 3 days ago, the colony of New Sejong was destroyed. 47,000 human beings were killed in a deliberate, methodical attack. The Valen Collective has claimed responsibility. They call it a territorial dispute. They call it a warning. She paused, looking around the chamber. Every face showed the same expression: shock, mixed with burning anger. We have reached out to the Galactic Council, asking for intervention. Their response arrived 1 hour ago. They offer their condolences. They suggest we negotiate. They recommend we consider the Valen perspective on territorial boundaries. A roar of outrage filled the chamber. Representatives jumped to their feet, shouting. Jiwan raised her hand for silence. The Galactic Council will not help us. The other species see us as newcomers, as upstarts who have expanded too fast. Some have privately suggested we provoked this attack, that we should have known better than to settle in disputed space. More shouts of anger. One representative from Mars threw his datapad across the room. So we stand alone, Jiwan continued, as we have always stood. Alone, but not helpless. I am invoking Article 7 of the Terran Defense Charter. When diplomacy fails and genocide succeeds, humanity will answer with total war. The chamber fell silent. Article 7 had been written into Earth's constitution after the Belt Wars, 50 years ago. It had never been invoked. It meant the mobilization of every military asset humanity possessed. It meant war without compromise until victory was achieved. Fleet Admiral Tae-young Kim stepped up to join the premier at the podium. He was 70 years old. A veteran of every military conflict humanity had fought since leaving Earth's solar system. His uniform was covered in medals and ribbons. His eyes were hard as diamonds. Premier Lee has asked me to present our response plan, he said. Operation Righteous Storm. The objective is simple. Make the Valen Collective regret what they have done. Make them pay a price so high that no other species will ever consider attacking human civilians again. He activated the holographic display. Images filled the air above the chamber, ships, soldiers, weapons, but most of all, the image of a single soldier in powered armor, standing 8 feet tall, bristling with weapons. We will deploy the Warbringers, Admiral Kim said. A shocked murmur ran through the chamber. Everyone knew about the Warbringer program, but it was classified. Top secret. The ultimate weapon that humanity had been building for 3 decades, preparing for the day when they would face an enemy they could not defeat through normal means. The Warbringer Corps currently numbers 800,000 soldiers, Admiral Kim continued. Each one is a volunteer who has undergone years of genetic enhancement, cybernetic augmentation, and intensive training. They are the finest warriors humanity has ever produced. We will deploy all of them. Representative Baman Che from Luna stood up. Admiral, the cost of deploying the entire Warbringer Corps would bankrupt us. Each soldier costs as much as a destroyer to train and equip. We're talking about making sure no one ever massacres our children again. Admiral Kim's voice cracked like thunder. Money means nothing if we don't have the will to defend ourselves. The Valen Collective killed 47,000 civilians without warning. They need to learn what happens when you cross that line. Premier Jiwan stepped forward again. The vote is simple. Do we authorize Operation Righteous Storm? Do we send our Warbringers to deliver justice for New Sejong? The vote was unanimous. 423 representatives, all voting yes, not a single abstention, not a single vote against. Colonel Narration sat in her office on Luna Base, watching the parliamentary session on her screen. She commanded the Warbringer Corps. All 800,000 of them. She had spent her entire adult life building this force, training these soldiers, preparing for a war she had hoped would never come. Her communications console beeped. The orders were coming through. She read them once, then stood up and straightened her uniform. It was time to wake the hammer. Across the solar system, activation orders flashed to every Warbringer base. On Earth, Mars, Luna, Titan, Europa, and a dozen hidden facilities in the belt. 800,000 soldiers received the same message at the same moment. Operation Righteous Storm is authorized. Report to deployment stations immediately. Destination: Valen Space. Mission: make them pay. In his barracks on Earth, Ji-hoon Kang read the message and felt his enhanced heart begin to beat faster. He had trained for 15 years to become a Warbringer. He had endured the genetic modifications that made his bones unbreakable and his muscles 3 times stronger than normal humans. He had accepted the cybernetic implants that gave him reflexes faster than any natural creature. He had learned to fight in armor that made him a walking tank. Now, finally, he would go to war. Across the solar system, 800,000 soldiers began preparing for deployment. They checked their armor, cleaned their weapons, and said goodbye to loved ones. They knew some of them would not come back. But they also knew that humanity was watching, waiting to see if their species would stand up and fight, or bow down and accept being victims. Premier Jiwan Lee addressed Earth and all its colonies one final time that day. To the people of Earth and all human worlds, we have suffered a terrible loss. 47,000 of our brothers and sisters are gone. But we will not bow. We will not retreat. We will not forgive. The Valen Collective will learn that humanity protects its own, and when we are wronged, we do not forget. We do not forgive. We make them pay. The message was broadcast across all of human space, and it was picked up by listening posts belonging to other species. The galaxy was watching. Some species thought humanity was making a mistake, starting a war it could not win. Others wondered if maybe, just maybe, these humans were more dangerous than anyone had realized. The armada began to assemble. The assembly point was a massive space station called Fortress Olympus, floating in the darkness between Mars and Jupiter. It had been built in secret over 20 years, designed for exactly this purpose, staging the largest military operation humanity had ever attempted. Transport ships arrived in waves, dozens every hour. Each one carried 1,000 Warbringers and their equipment. The station's docking bays worked without rest, processing ship after ship. The soldiers came from everywhere. Earth's training facilities, the hidden bases on Mars, the underground complexes on Europa, where they had trained in zero-gravity combat. Commander Ji-hoon Kang stood on the observation deck of the transport ship times Iron Mountain Asterisk, watching Fortress Olympus grow larger as they approached. He was 38 years old and had spent half his life becoming a warbringer. The genetic modifications had started when he was 19. They had rebuilt his entire body over the course of 3 years. His skeleton was reinforced with ceramic composite. His muscles were enhanced with synthetic fibers. His nervous system was upgraded with cybernetic implants that made him think and react faster than any normal human could. But the physical changes were just the beginning. The training was what made a warbringer truly dangerous. 10 years of learning every form of combat ever invented: hand-to-hand fighting, weapons handling, tactical planning, survival skills. They had dropped him alone on hostile worlds and told him to survive for months with nothing but his armor and his wits. They had put him through simulations so realistic, he still had nightmares about them. And now, finally, it was real. "Commander Kang, we're docking in 5 minutes," the pilot's voice came over the intercom. Ji-hoon nodded to himself. Behind him, his entire legion, 10,000 Warbringers, waited in the transport bay. They were his responsibility now. The 7th Legion, one of the 80 legions that made up the Warbringer Corps. The docking clamps engaged with a heavy thud. The airlock hissed open. Ji-hoon led his legion into Fortress Olympus. The station was massive, but it was still crowded. 800,000 soldiers in powered armor took up a lot of space. The corridors were filled with Warbringers moving to their assigned sections. The armor made them all look identical, 8 feet tall, heavily armed, faceless behind their helmets. But each one was an individual, a person who had volunteered for this life. Sergeant Eun-ji Bae was checking her equipment for the 3rd time when her squad leader called for assembly. She was 31 years old and had been a Warbringer for 9 years. She was shorter than most of the others she had been, only 5 feet 2 inches before the modifications, but her armor made her just as tall and dangerous as anyone else. Yoonji had grown up on Mars colony. She remembered the fear when pirates had attacked shipping lanes near her home. She remembered feeling helpless, knowing that if something bad happened, there might not be anyone to save them. That's why she had volunteered for the Warbringer program. She never wanted to feel helpless again. Now she stood in the assembly hall with 999 other soldiers, all wearing the same armor, all ready to fight. Their squad leader, Lieutenant Junho, stood on a raised platform. "Listen up," his voice boomed through their helmet speakers. "We're part of the 2nd wave. Our target is a world called Korthos. It's a military academy planet. so expect professional soldiers. They'll know what they're doing, but we know what we're doing better. A few soldiers chuckled. Unji felt her enhanced heart beating steadily in her chest. She wasn't scared. The genetic modifications had removed most of her fear response. But she was alert, focused, ready. In another section of the station, Private Minho Yoon was having a minor panic attack. He was only 22, the youngest soldier in his squad. He had finished his training just 6 months ago. He had never seen real combat, never fired his weapon at anything except training targets and simulation enemies. "Breathe, kid," the soldier next to him said. It was Corporal Sunwoo, a veteran who had been a warbringer for 15 years. "Your armor will help regulate your stress. Just let it do its job." Minho took a deep breath. The armor's medical systems detected his elevated heart rate and released a small dose of calming chemicals into his bloodstream. The panic faded, replaced by a steady, controlled readiness. "Thanks," Minho said. "We all get nervous the first time," Sunwoo said. "The important thing is to remember your training. Stick with your squad. Follow orders. We've got your back." Colonel Nari Song stood in the command center, watching as the last transports docked. 800,000 soldiers, all accounted for. The logistics alone were staggering. Each warbringer required their own armor, weapons, ammunition, power supplies, medical supplies, and support equipment. The transport fleet needed to carry enough supplies to support all of them for months of combat. Fleet Admiral Kim joined her at the observation window. Together, they watched the organized chaos of the assembly. "I never thought we'd actually have to use them," Admiral Kim said quietly. "Neither did I," Nari replied. "But here we are. The Valen won't know what hit them. That's the point." The fleet that assembled at Fortress Olympus was enormous. 300 transport ships to carry the Warbringers, 200 escort carriers with fighter wings to provide air support, 150 frigates for orbital bombardment support, 50 destroyers for ship-to-ship combat. And at the center, 10 massive dreadnoughts that would lead the assault. It took 2 weeks to finish loading everything and everyone. 2 weeks of briefings, equipment checks, practice drills, and planning sessions. The soldiers studied maps of Valen worlds, learned about their enemies' tactics and technology, and memorized their objectives. On the day before departure, Colonel Nari assembled all 800,000 Warbringers in the station's massive hangar bay. It was the only space large enough to hold them all. They stood in perfect formation, 80 legions of 10,000 soldiers each, stretching as far as the eye could see. Nari's voice was broadcast to every helmet. "Warbringers, you know why we're here. 47,000 humans were murdered without warning or mercy. The galaxy thinks we'll just accept it. They think we'll negotiate, compromise, maybe file a complaint with the Galactic Council." She paused, looking out over the army she had built. "They're wrong. We're going to show them what happens when you hurt humanity. We're going to make the Valen Collective regret what they did. And we're going to make sure every other species in the galaxy thinks twice before they consider attacking human civilians. This isn't about revenge. This is about justice. This is about making sure Nu Sejong's children didn't die for nothing. This is about ensuring that no other human colony will ever face what they faced." 800,000 soldiers stood silent, listening. "You are Warbringers. You are humanity's answer to a hostile galaxy. You volunteered for this. You trained for this. And now, you're going to show them why attacking humans was the biggest mistake the Valen Collective ever made." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, the soldiers began to strike their armored fists against their chest plates. The sound built like thunder, echoing through the massive hangar. Boom, boom, boom. 800,000 fists beating in perfect rhythm. Nari felt a chill run down her spine. This was the sound of human fury. Controlled and focused and ready to be unleashed. The fleet departed Fortress Olympus the next day. 300 transport ships, protected by hundreds of warships, all heading toward Valen space. The journey would take 4 weeks through slip space, 4 weeks for the soldiers to prepare, to train, to get ready for what was coming. On the command ship Time's indomitable asterisk, Admiral Kim watched his fleet disappear into faster-than-light travel. He had fought in many battles over his long career. But he had never led an army this large, on a mission this important. Humanity was going to war, not a small border skirmish or a police action. Real war. The kind that would be remembered for centuries. He just hoped they were ready for what they would find when they arrived. In his quarters on the transport ship, Ji-hoon Kang sat alone, looking at a picture on his datapad. It showed his sister and her 2 children. They had lived on New Sejong. He had been planning to visit them next year. Now they were gone, turned to ash in the first wave of bombardment. Ji-hoon closed his eyes and let the armor systems help him sleep. In 4 weeks, he would arrive at the Valen home system. And then he would make sure his sister's death had meaning. The armada flew through the darkness between stars, carrying humanity's fury toward its target. The human fleet emerged from slipspace at the edge of the Valen home system. 500 warships appeared in perfect formation. Their arrival detected immediately by Valen sensor stations. Alarms began sounding across 6 worlds. On the bridge of the Time's indomitable asterisk, Fleet Admiral Kim watched the tactical display update. The Valen home system contained 8 planets, but 6 of them were colonized. Intelligence reports showed population centers, military bases, orbital stations, and defense platforms. The Valen Collective had ruled this system for 3,000 years. They had never been invaded. That was about to change. Open all channels, Admiral Kim ordered. Broadcast on every frequency they have. The communications officer nodded. Channel open, sir. Kim's voice was calm and cold. This is Fleet Admiral Taeyong Kim of the United Terran Forces. 3 weeks ago, your military destroyed the human colony of New Sejong without warning. 47,000 civilians were killed. We demand the immediate surrender of High Commander Valak and all officers responsible for ordering that attack. You have 6 hours to comply. He paused, letting the silence stretch. If you refuse, we will show you the same mercy you showed our children at New Sejong. Choose wisely. The transmission ended. On the Valen homeworld, the High Council gathered in emergency session. High Commander Velak stood before them, his 4 arms crossed in a gesture of defiance. They're bluffing, Velak said. Humanity doesn't have the strength to attack our home system. We have 200 warships in defensive positions. Our orbital platforms can destroy any invasion fleet. They'll negotiate. But the eldest council member, Speaker Thorin, looked at the sensor readings with growing concern. 500 ships. I've never seen humans field a fleet that large. What if they're not bluffing? Then we destroy them, Velak replied. Scramble all defense forces. We'll break this fleet and send the survivors running back to their tiny corner of space. The Valen defense fleet launched from their orbital anchorages. 200 warships, each one a match for any human vessel. They formed up between the human fleet and the inner planets, ready to defend their worlds. But the human fleet didn't advance toward them. Instead, something strange happened. The massive formation split apart. The transport ships, protected by escorts, began moving towards 6 different planets simultaneously. The Valen commanders watched in confusion as the human fleet dispersed across the entire system. What are they doing? Velak demanded. They're dividing their forces. We can pick them off one group at a time. But Speaker Thorin understood, and his blood ran cold. They're not trying to fight our fleet. They're bypassing us entirely. They're going for the planets. On the transport ship carrying the 7th Legion, Commander Ji-hoon Kang stood with his 10,000 soldiers. They were all sealed in their armor, weapons loaded, minds focused. The ship shook as it entered the atmosphere of Valen Prime, the largest industrial world in the system. 2 minutes to drop, the pilot announced. Ji-hoon activated his helmet's communication system. Listen up, 7th Legion. We're hitting the primary manufacturing complex. The facility produces military hardware for their entire fleet. Our job is to capture or destroy it. Stay with your squads, watch your sectors, and remember, civilian targets are off limits. We're not here to murder innocents. "We're here to break their military." The soldiers responded with a simple acknowledgement. They had trained for this scenario dozens of times in simulations. Now it was real. The transport's bay doors opened. Wind screamed through the opening as the ship descended through clouds. Below, Jihoon could see the sprawling factory complex. Hundreds of buildings, fusion reactors, landing pads with ships being built. Drop in 10 seconds. Go, go, go. Jihoon stepped into empty air and fell. His armor's thrusters fired, controlling his descent as he plummeted toward the ground at terminal velocity. Around him, 10,000 other Warbringers fell like an armored meteor shower. The ground rushed up to meet them. Jihoon hit the surface with a heavy thud that would have killed an unarmored human. His armor absorbed the impact, hydraulic legs flexing to distribute the force. He was on his feet instantly, weapon raised, scanning for targets. The Valen defenders opened fire within seconds. They had been expecting a naval battle, not a ground invasion. But they were professional soldiers, and they adapted quickly. Plasma fire streaked across the compound as Valen troops engaged the Warbringers. The plasma bolts splashed against Jihoon's armor, scorching the surface but not penetrating. His suit's shields absorbed most of the energy. He returned fire with his heavy plasma rifle, the weapon designed specifically for Warbringer use. His shots were accurate and deadly. 3 Valen soldiers went down. All around him, the 7th Legion advanced. The Warbringers moved in perfect coordination, their neural links allowing squad-level communication without words. They flowed through the compound like water, clearing buildings and securing objectives. The Valen defenders fought bravely. They used cover effectively, coordinated their fire, and tried to flank the advancing humans. But they had never faced anything like Warbringers before. The armored humans shrugged off weapons fire that should have killed them. They moved faster than soldiers wearing such heavy armor should be able to move, and they fought with a precision that was almost inhuman, because in a way, they were no longer entirely human. The genetic modifications, the cybernetic enhancements, the years of brutal training, all of it had transformed them into something new, something more dangerous. On the planet Korthas, Sergeant Eun-ji Bae led her squad through the military academy complex. Her target was the command building where future Valen officers were trained. Intelligence said the facility also housed a strategic planning center that coordinated defensive operations for the entire sector. Her squad moved through the buildings like ghosts. They had trained for urban combat in environments exactly like this. Every corner was checked. Every room was cleared. The academy cadets tried to mount a defense, but they were students facing professional killers. Eun-ji felt no satisfaction in it. These were young soldiers, barely trained. But orders were orders. The facility had to be taken. One cadet, barely old enough to be called an adult, raised his weapon with shaking hands. Eun-ji shot him before he could fire. She felt nothing the emotional dampeners in her system saw to that. Later, maybe, she would process what she had done. But not now. Now there was only the mission. On the agricultural world of Tellin, Private Minho Yoon experienced real combat for the first time. His squad had been assigned to secure a military supply depot on the outskirts of a farming community. The drop had gone well, but now they were taking fire from Valen soldiers dug into defensive positions. Minho pressed himself against a wall as plasma bolts screamed past his head. His training kept him calm. His armor kept him alive, and his squadmates kept him focused. "Minho, suppressing fire on that bunker." Corporal Sunwoo's voice crackled in his helmet. "We're flanking right." Minho stepped out from cover and opened fire with his heavy weapon. The bunker's defenders ducked as his shots hammered their position. It gave Sunwoo and 2 others time to circle around and hit the bunker from the side. The fight lasted 10 minutes. When it was over, the supply depot was in human hands. Minho stood among the wreckage, breathing hard, his armor scorched in a dozen places. He had survived his first real battle. Across 6 worlds, similar scenes played out. 800,000 Warbringers deployed simultaneously, hitting military targets across the entire Valen collective. Factories, command centers, training facilities, fleet anchorages, weapons depots everywhere that supported the Valen military machine became a battlefield. The Valen defense fleet tried to respond, but they were designed to fight other ships, not support ground operations. They attempted orbital strikes, but the human frigates engaged them, forcing them to deal with threats in space while the ground assault continued. High Commander Velek watched the reports flood in from all 6 worlds. Human soldiers, impossibly strong and heavily armed, were tearing through his defensive positions. Casualties were mounting. Critical facilities were falling. "How many soldiers did they land?" he demanded. "Analysis suggests 800,000, Commander," an aide reported, his voice shaking. "They hit all 6 worlds at once. With overwhelming force. 800,000? Velek couldn't believe it. How did they transport that many troops? The logistics alone. "They've been planning this," Speaker Thorin said quietly. "This wasn't a hasty response. This was prepared. They built this army specifically for this purpose." Within 48 hours of landing, human forces had secured strong positions on all 6 worlds. They held the major military installations and were expanding their control systematically. The Valen military was still fighting, still resisting, but they were being pushed back. In orbit, Fleet Admiral Kim received the status reports. The invasion was proceeding according to plan. Casualties were within acceptable limits. 800 soldiers lost so far, against tens of thousands of Valen defenders. He opened a channel to the Valen High Council. "This is Admiral Kim. We now control your primary military infrastructure on 6 worlds. Your fleet is bottled up and cannot effectively support your ground forces. I'm offering you one more chance to surrender the officers responsible for New Sejong and negotiate terms. And if we refuse?" High Commander Velek's voice was angry but uncertain. "Then we continue," Kim replied. "We'll systematically dismantle every military installation you have. Every base, every factory, every orbital platform, and when we're done, your collective will have no ability to threaten anyone ever again." The transmission ended. On the surface of Valen Prime, Ji-Hoon Kang stood on top of a captured factory, looking out over the city. His armor systems detected movement civilians, watching from their buildings, afraid but not under attack. The Warbringers had been given strict orders. No civilian casualties unless unavoidable. This was not genocide. This was a demonstration of power. The message was simple. Hurt us, and we will hurt you worse. The war dragged on for 3 months. Not because the Valen had the strength to win, but because humanity wanted to make sure the lesson was clear. This was not a quick raid or a punitive strike. This was the systematic dismantling of an entire military infrastructure. Commander Ji-Hoon Kang spent those 3 months on Valen Prime, leading his legion from one objective to the next. They captured fleet anchorages where warships were built. They destroyed weapons factories that produced plasma cannons and missiles. They occupied command centers that coordinated military operations across 20 star systems. The Valen soldiers fought with determination and courage. Ji-Hoon respected that. These were professional warriors, defending their homes. But courage alone couldn't overcome the difference in capability. The Warbringers were simply too strong, too well trained, too well equipped. Every battle ended the same way: human victory at acceptable cost. By the end of the first month, human forces controlled every major military installation on all 6 worlds. The Valen fleet was scattered and broken, with surviving ships fleeing to outer systems. The orbital defense platforms had been captured or destroyed. The collective's ability to wage war had been crippled. But Premier Ji-Won Lee's orders were specific. Don't just defeat them. Make sure they understand why they were defeated. The Warbringers continued their operations, methodically working through secondary and tertiary targets. Every military academy was occupied. Every training facility was shut down. Every weapons storage depot was emptied or destroyed. Sergeant Unji Bey stood guard outside a captured command bunker on Korthus when a group of Valen civilians approached. They were old, probably civilians their entire lives. Carrying what looked like food, they stopped at a respectful distance. One of them, an elderly female with silvering skin plates, spoke in broken but understandable human language. "Why you no kill us? Your people die. We expect death." Unji's voice came through her helmet's external speakers. "We're not here to kill civilians. We're here to make sure your military never attacks our civilians again." The Valen woman looked confused. "But war is war. Winners take all." "Yes, not for humans," Unji replied. "We fight soldiers. We destroy military targets. But we don't murder innocent people. That's what makes us different from High Commander Velek." The civilians left the food and departed. It was the first of many such encounters. As the weeks passed, Valen civilians began to understand that while the human soldiers were deadly to military targets, they went out of their way to avoid civilian casualties. Power stayed on. Water kept flowing. Hospitals continued operating. Food distribution networks were maintained. This wasn't an extermination. This was an occupation. Private Minho Yoon discovered he was good at talking with civilians. His squad was assigned to guard a captured supply depot near a residential area. Local Valen would sometimes approach, curious or scared or both. Minho learned some of their language, shared rations with hungry families, helped an injured civilian get to a hospital. "You're supposed to hate us," one young Valen said to him one day. "Your colony was destroyed. Why are you kind?" Minho thought about it for a while. "Hating you doesn't bring back the people who died at New Sejong, but showing you that humans aren't monsters, that maybe prevents the next war. My commanders, they taught us something. We're not here to make more enemies. We're here to make sure the enemies we have think twice before attacking us again." Back on Earth, the war was being broadcast to every human world. People watched as Warbringer forces systematically conquered 6 worlds without engaging in atrocities. Soldiers fought. Soldiers. Infrastructure was captured or destroyed. But civilian areas were left alone unless they housed military targets. The contrast with what happened at New Sejong was stark and intentional. By the end of the second month, the Valen High Council was fracturing. Some members wanted to continue fighting, to bleed the humans even if they couldn't win. Others recognized the futility and pushed for negotiations. The debate raged for weeks while their worlds remained under occupation. High Commander Velak remained defiant. "We retreat now. We'll look weak. Every species in the galaxy will think they can push us around." Speaker Thorin, the elder council member, shook his head. "Velek, we already look weak. The humans have occupied 6 of our worlds for 2 months, and we can't push them out. Every day this continues, we lose more soldiers and more infrastructure. Better to negotiate now while we still have something to negotiate with." The turning point came when Sergeant Unji's squad captured the military command bunker where the High Council was hiding. They had tracked the location through intercepted communications and 3 days of careful planning. The assault was precise shaped charges to breach the doors, flashbang grenades to disorient the guards, then Warbringers flooding in with overwhelming force. The entire High Council, including High Commander Velek, were captured in 15 minutes without a single civilian casualty. Unji personally placed restraints on Velek's 4 arms while he glared at her with all 6 of his eyes. "You should have killed us at New Sejong," Velak said bitterly. "Then this war would have ended quickly." "We're not you," Unji replied. "We remember the difference between soldiers and children." News of the capture spread quickly. The Valen resistance, which had been steadily weakening, collapsed within days. Without central leadership and with their best troops defeated or dead, organized military resistance ended. Fleet Admiral Kim broadcast to all Valen worlds. "The war is over. Your leadership is in custody. Your military infrastructure is under our control. It's time to discuss terms." The Treaty of Endara was negotiated aboard the Time's Indomitable Times over the course of 2 weeks. The Valen Collective sent new representatives, members of their civilian government who had not been involved in the attack on New Sejong. Premier Jiwon Lee represented humanity, along with Admiral Kim and Colonel Nari Song. The terms were harsh but fair. First, High Commander Velek and all officers who had participated in the New Sejong attack would face trial for war crimes. They would be judged by an independent tribunal with representatives from neutral species. Second, the Valen Collective would pay reparations sufficient to rebuild New Sejong and compensate the families of all 47,000 victims. The payments would be structured over 20 years to avoid destroying the Valen economy. Third, all Valen territory adjacent to human space would become a demilitarized zone. No military installations, no warships, no weapons platforms. The buffer zone would be 5 light-years deep. Fourth, human observers would be stationed throughout Valen space for 50 years, monitoring their military activities and ensuring compliance with the treaty. The Valen negotiators protested the terms, especially the observers and demilitarized zone. But Premier Jiwan was unmoved. "You killed 47,000 of our people without warning," she said coldly. "You started this war. These are the consequences. Sign the treaty, or we continue dismantling your military capacity until you have nothing left to negotiate with." The Valen signed. The withdrawal began immediately. 800,000 Warbringers began returning to their transport ships. The occupation had cost 14,000 human lives, soldiers killed in combat, over 3 months of fighting. Memorial services were held on each of the 6 conquered worlds before the forces departed. Commander Ji-hoon Kang stood at attention during the memorial on Valen Prime. The names of the fallen from the 7th Legion were read aloud. 438 soldiers, who would never go home. He had known many of them personally. They had trained together, fought together, died together. When the memorial ended, a Valen civilian approached him. It was the same elderly female who had brought food months earlier. "I am sorry for your losses," she said in careful human language. "You fight with honor. My people, we will not forget." Ji-hoon nodded slowly. "Make sure you don't forget. Make sure your leaders never decide to attack human civilians again." The last transport ship left Valen space 3 months and 2 weeks after the invasion began. They left behind monitoring stations, staffed by rotating crews of human observers. They left behind a collective that had been humbled, but not destroyed, weakened but still capable of rebuilding. The fleet returned to human space as heroes. Parades were held on Earth, Mars, and Luna. 800,000 soldiers marched through cities while millions cheered. They had gone to war and won. They had avenged New Sejong. They had shown the galaxy that humanity would not be pushed around. But for Ji-hoon and many others, the victory felt hollow. 14,000 empty seats at the victory parade. 14,000 families grieving, and on New Sejong, 47,000 graves that would never be filled because there were no bodies to bury. 5 years later, New Sejong was rebuilt. The new colony rose from the ashes of the old, constructed with reparation money from the Valen Collective. The population was smaller now, only 15,000 settlers. Many of them families of fallen Warbringers who had been granted priority for colonization rights. A massive memorial stood at the center of the main settlement. 47,000 names carved in stone, arranged in a spiral that visitors could walk through. At the center, a simple inscription: "They died without warning. They are avenged but not forgotten." General Ji-hoon Kang, promoted after the war, visited the memorial on the 5th anniversary of the attack. He walked slowly through the spiral of names, reading them one by one. He stopped at his sister's name, his niece and nephew's names. He placed his hand on the cold stone. A voice spoke behind him. "General Kang?" He turned to see a young Valan in diplomatic attire. The alien looked nervous but determined. "I am Varath," the Valan said. "I am assigned to the Terran Diplomatic Corps. I wanted to tell you I am sorry. For what my people did. For all of this." Ji-hoon studied the young diplomat for a long moment. "You weren't responsible. You probably weren't even old enough to serve in the military when it happened." "No," Varath agreed. "But my people were responsible. And I want you to know, we teach about New Sejong now. In our schools. We teach what happened when we attacked civilians. We teach about the cost of that mistake." "Good," Ji-hoon said quietly. "Make sure you keep teaching it. Make sure your children's children remember." They stood together in silence, looking at the memorial. A human general and a Valen diplomat, standing on the grave of a colony that had died so a lesson could be learned. The lesson was simple. Humanity could be patient, could be diplomatic, could be reasonable, but push them too far, threaten their civilians, commit genocide against their children, and humanity would answer with overwhelming, methodical, unstoppable force. The galaxy had learned. 800,000 Warbringers stood ready across human space, training, preparing, waiting. They were the sword sheathed, but never forgotten. The promise that human lives would be protected, no matter the cost. And in the years that followed, no species ever attacked a human colony again. The lesson of New Sejong and the price paid by the Valen Collective echoed across the stars. Humanity had proven what it would do to defend its own. The Warbringers had done their job. Peace, purchased with blood and maintained by the memory of fury, settled over human space, and 47,000 names carved in stone stood as testament to why that peace would be defended, no matter what came next.